Well, is it time? Okay. Uh, just so you know, I'm being very, I am two cultural identities, and I'm being very German today. I was on time. So, and I'm ready. So, that's probably one of the biggest cultural differences that you'll discover between my two parts. So, one part of me is my father, who is of German and Czech or Bohemian descendancy. There's also about this much other stuff in there too, and some stuff that we were really surprised by. But it's but there's a very structured way that things go about, and that there is a timeline and a task and a way of organizing things so that you follow that timeline, and that you always have a process. Whereas on my mother's side, who is Sichangu Lakota from the Rosebud Sioux tribe, time is not a measurable identity like on my dad's side. Time is something that occurs. Time is nothing to do with what you do, so to speak. Meaning that church is being held out on the Rosebud at a Catholic church. The time says Mass will be at 10, and the priest knows that he won't start Mass until about 11:15. Even though there'll be people there at 10. Well, because it's one of these things that the journey is always about getting to where you're going. It doesn't matter when you get there. So, where on my dad's side, the journey is when you get there, then you've got to do this, this, and this. Where on the Lakota side, we'll get there when we get there. Does that make sense? So it's a real challenging aspect because the term that's used to describe this is called colonization. So to become colonized means that I was on time and that I was ready to go. To be traditional Lakota would have meant that I would have been here sometime between now and... Yeah, right? Yeah. And it's not that they're being disrespectful. The respect is that they arrive. The other thing that I'm doing different is I'm making eye contact with a lot of you. And in my culture, on my mom's side, making eye contact is disrespect. So, yeah. And then that I didn't allow you to speak first because you're the elders. You're the Lakota elders to me. So you have the right to speak before I do. And I should sit in the back and listen. So that's a big point of emphasis too, is that the way we follow in our process is really the difference between the two cultural groups that I grew up in. And so it was amazing, I can't tell you the cultural differences in going to church on a regular Sunday growing up. My dad was, we gotta be there, and then because he was hard of hearing, he had to sit in the front row. And then and my mom was, we'll get there, Mike, we'll get there, And we'd always arrive after everything had started, the announcements were done, and we'd come in and go all the way to the front. So, and it's, but that's the truth of the matter. So sometimes I can pop between both of them, but I'm finding as I get older that structure is something like, even with teaching with young kids, it's because that's very unstructured. It gets to be a challenge because you're like, oh, please give me some structure. But life is different on the Lakota reservation. I've had to make some business calls out there, and it's on their time and when they respond and how they respond to you. And so we're going to do the Minnesota thing, and we're going to drive out there and we're going to meet with them. But that's the difference, is understanding that and being able to adjust to that, yeah. So, and that's a huge cultural difference when you think about it, because the expectation that you want to get something done, but at the same time, it needs to get done when it's going to get done. I'm making a sculpture right now for the city of Northfield. It's going to be a 15-foot tall eagle. It's fabricated out of steel. It was due May 15th. It's not that I haven't been working on it. I've been putting in, when I was still teaching, I was still putting in 6 to 7 hour days when I got home on it. And yesterday we put in a 12-hour day. Hopefully I'll deliver it next Friday. That's the plan. But it's what, 6 weeks overdue? And it's not that I just, I took a job, didn't have the proper facilities, so I lost December, January, February. But to me, that was, I told them up front, I said, I have an outdoor facility, so I might not be able to weld in January. So those are things that I have to take into account and that I have to allow for. Whoops, sorry about that. And then I can't fit my fingers in there. So, so I'm going to start out with, this is a traditional greeting. The word how mitakuye oesan means hello, all my relatives. So the Lakota, who I am a part of, believe that we are all related. And it goes further than just humans. We believe that the horses, we believe snakes, we believe birds, we believe the ground, we believe the trees, that we're all a part of one family. And that what affects us affects them, and what affects them affects us. And so probably the biggest difference is in Genesis it says, and God gave dominion over them. And the difference is the Lakota believed that we didn't have dominion. Nor did the original Norse people. They believed that they were symbiotic and a part of the same system. In the Bible it says we got dominion over all the animals and the earth. And that's a huge difference, and that's another cultural difference that occurs between the two groups. So when we say that we are all related, it's not talking cousins. We don't even have the term first cousins. We don't have the term second cousins. We don't have the term great uncle. Everybody that is my grandparents' age is considered a grandparent. So they have the same authority that my grandparents have over my children. And they have to be treated as if they are grandparents. Does that make sense? So my children were raised, my mother-in-law lives in what's called the HUD in Cottonwood. It's the apartment building, low income. And they moved there. They were super excited to move there because all their friends lived there. And they were a part of the community and everything. And my mother-in-law has, at that time when they moved in, when my son was really little, there was probably 20 lady friends there that she was just with. And my son called them all Unchi. Unchi is grandma. Didn't refer to them as great aunt, or you call the family friend the uncle or the aunt, even though they're not really. But that's the way it is. So anybody my age was my son's aunt and uncle. And so he treated them with the same respect. We hear numerous times now from these families of my mother-in-law's friends how they talk about how respectful my son is, and that their parents really loved my son because whenever he came in, he treated them as if they were his grandparents. And he still does that. And so I'm really proud of him for that. But at the same time, that's the expectation we gave him. So even people like teachers or law enforcement or businesses, people that were older than him, he always treated with that they get respect because they've been around, they've survived. And because of that, they have that respect. So that's when we talk about how mitakuye oesan, this is what we're talking about. So everybody is in that same role. And you don't just have a grandparent or 4 grandparents. You have an army of grandparents. And it was really weird when I was growing up because I'd be introduced, this is your grandpa, this is your grandma. I'm like, Okay. Because I didn't know. My mom didn't really explain it. She just always introduced everybody that way. And so we were very clear with my son right away that you're going to treat them as if they are your grandparents and talk to them as if you're your grandparents. And so that was a key role. But that's carrying on this tradition of how we greet people, that we're reminding everybody that we're related. All right, so why aren't we going to the next slide? Oh, it did. It said, hello, all my relatives, right? Oh, why is this happening? Hey, it was working before. So again, this is a very familiar group for me. This is what we call, in modern terms, you call a powwow. And this is a gathering of friends and relatives. But this is something I want to point out. We call it a wachipi. And a wachipi is a celebration. It's only done when you are allowed to celebrate. So if you've had a death in a family, you're not allowed to go. You have to wait a year before you can celebrate. So there's things of that nature that really affect this because you have to have a year of mourning. But this is where you'll hear this phrase uttered a lot. Here's a question. So that first word you saw was how, and it was H-A-U. And in the old movies, they always would go, how. Okay, well, I don't know if they necessarily raise their hand, but a lot of times this symbol right here is good. So if you do this hand gesture, it means good. So a lot of times if you saw someone say, they would go like this, and that's where this gets modified to, because they didn't understand that this motion meant this is good. And so how is a word that is used, and we think of it as H-O-W, and it's actually H-A-U. But again, this is something that they actually do say, but it's not how we interpret it in English speaking. It is the greeting, just like yesterday we were talking about in Japanese culture. There were on America's Got Talent last night. There was a group from Japan, and they did this really cool rhythmic dance type of thing, and they were and my daughter goes, "How do you say hello in Japanese?" And hi, H-A-I, is how you say hello. So in German it can be a lot of ways. Guten Tag, but it's each culture has their own way to say hello, and ours, because it translates almost into a word that we use for something different, has become a Hollywood stereotype and has become a part of something that is become something that is not how they actually are, but is a traditional greeting. You won't see an Indian going, how. That's just not how it happened. It was a very formal situation if they did that to you. Otherwise, it would, it might be how. It might be just something as an internal greeting, not this formalness where they stand like this. And so that became something that was attributed as that's how they always did it. It's really interesting. You watch, though, there are some things in the Western stereotypes that have a basis in fact, but there are a lot of things that don't. If you watch an old World War II movie, you'll usually find one Native American in the platoon. The crazy thing is that there was almost one Indian in every platoon because they were code talkers. They're the guys that talked on the radio. My grandpa died before he was allowed to, but my other grandpa, a guy named LaPointe, he was allowed to in 2005 because the 55-year limit had ended. And so he admitted that him and most of his family members, who was my grandpa included, were all a part of a group of people that belonged to a certain division in the Army, and they were all code talkers. And the funny thing of it is we've got this picture of my grandpa from the Army days, and excuse the reference, but there's a white guy in the picture. And we'd ask, who is that guy? And he'd never give us his name. He would just say he's my friend. Well, that's the guy that was supposed to kill him if they ever got captured. And so he had to do everything with that guy, because you couldn't allow them to be captured, because then they could give up the language. And then if the language is given up, then the Germans would know how everybody was doing everything. They used the Lakota in the European theater, and they used the Navajo in the Japanese theater. So it's really interesting when you think about it that our words and how that language is derived, and that in some of the World War II movies from the 40s and 50s, you'll always find there's a person, a Native American in the group. So here's a question. I am Lakota. I am a part of 7 council fires. I am Sicangu, there's Hunkpapa, Oglala, there's a bunch of others. How many American Indian nations do you believe there are?
A lot.
A lot. Yeah, it's true. Whoops. There are 556 federally recognized American tribes. Now, there are more than that in the United States. There are, they believe, up to around 630, and those have not been federally recognized. Partially because most of them were either assimilated or were almost wiped out. You know, you hear the last of the Mohicans, you know, the Mohican group was almost entirely wiped out. So, you know, the Dakota in Minnesota were, for a time, were pretty much, once the war ended and they hung the Indians at Mankato, the law said if 2 or more of them are gathered, you can shoot them. So everybody fled. So the limit, and that law is still technically on the books in Minnesota. So there are groups of people that claim a tribal affiliation, but that tribe has not been recognized by the government because of its size or how much power they have to be able to do the federal recognition, that type of thing. So in Canada, there is about the same amount. And then in Mexico, there's probably at least that many. So between Mexico, Canada, what makes up North America, there's probably 1,500 to 1,800 different tribal groups that spoke a different language. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. South Dakota's probably got the largest population next to Arizona and New Mexico. So, and that's because they became, you know, that it was land that people didn't want. So it was given to the Indians, and they could put Oklahoma's another one. There's like 40 tribes that are all down there. So this is what we consider in Lakota the Ochet, and this, I struggle with this word, Ocheti Sakowin, which means the family, our family grouping, or our family organization, however you want to say it. But this is the 7 council fires that the Dakota recognize. Okay, so there are the Wahpeton, the Mdewakanton, the Wakapute, the Sisseton, the Eyanktene, and then this is one I struggle with too, but this is Eyanktene, and then there's a little bit extra, and I can't read it right here, but these are the Yankton groupings. These are the people from Sisseton, the Wahpeton, and then the Mdewakanton was the people that were pretty much Minneapolis, St. Paul area. And then the Wahpeton are just on the, you know, east of the, so they'd have been Alex in that area. All this group up here, these group of people lived in Minnesota, and in the beginning, probably when 1492 happened, they lived on the north shore of Lake Superior, Mille Lacs, into Wisconsin, and all along the boundary waters. And then as the French fur traders came, and muskets and iron axes, things like that, this group of people got pushed westward, and they ended up becoming semi-tree and plains people. And so a dwelling, what we call a teepee, in this group of people is only made with 2 buffalo hides. So it's very small, and it's usually made with bark, birch, and other things that have been foraged. Whereas this group was the group I belong, the Teton, and the Tetons are the group, the Western group, and there are 7 council fires in that group. And we are, that's where the Lakota, we are the ones that are considered the Lakota. This group of people, the Wahpeton, Mdewakanton, Wahpetons, the Sissetons, are considered the Dakota, and their name starts with a D, ours starts with an L, and the Eyanktonai and the Yanktons, they're Nakota, and theirs starts with an N. Now, what that is I always joke, I say I love you, Dakota say I dove you, and Nakota say I love you. And that's a real big difference. So the way we say pilamaye for thank you, but here in Dakota country you say pidamaye, and in Yankton area you'd say pinamaye. So it's again, it's now you're talking 566 different groupings of people, and they do things different. These guys fished. Ugh, my mom won't touch fish. These guys fish. They're known as where the fish are, and Yankton means, where the fish are, and at the end of the river where the fish are. And these guys, they eat everything else, and we eat buffalo. I mean, that's the striking difference between people that speak the same language, but it's, we don't have grits up here. And okra, that's all new stuff. When I was a kid, we didn't have grits or okra. Tell that what was that lady? She was the waitress. Something about get your grits. Alice, yes, yeah. So bringing back some memories. So that's a big difference. There's 4 Dakota, 2 Nakota, and 1 Lakota, the Tetons. So the Dakota people, and I just talked about this, and I got ahead of myself. They're the people, they are currently all over the place now because they had to flee after the 1862 conflict. They had to flee. They're in Winnipeg, north of Winnipeg. They're called reserves up there, not reservations. So there's 2 large reserves north of Winnipeg that are almost all entirely Dakota. There's a really, you guys know what Boy Scouts are, Cub Scouts. Well, the guy that they patterned themselves after was a guy named Charles Eastman. And Charles Eastman, his mom was Dakota and his dad was white before the 1862 conflict. And he got caught up in the conflict and he had to flee. And so he wrote a book called This Boy's Life, which is about how to raise a boy in Dakota culture. And the people that started the Cub Scouts basically took everything from that book and used it to make the Cub Scout guides. So it's really interesting how we borrow things and use things that are a part of the traditional culture that was here to begin with. But it's a big event, and so these guys they're even west into Manitoba, or not Manitoba, Winnipeg's Manitoba, but the next one. Is it Saskatchewan? Yeah, so Saskatchewan, there's some in North Dakota at Devil's Lake. Then Sisseton has a bunch, Wahpeton area has a whole bunch, Yankton has a bunch, and my grandmother grew up on the Rosebud Reservation in a place called Little Crow Camp. And Little Crow Camp didn't exist until after 1862. So the argument is that my grandmother was a Little Crow, which means that I'm not only Lakota, but that I'm part Dakota. Yeah, and I have roots in Minneapolis, St. Paul, that area. So Little Crow was actually born on what is the western or the eastern shore of the Mississippi River, not Vadnais Heights, but and just to the east of Columbia Heights, but right there, there's a really cool park too. When you ride the St. Paul Bike Classic, you stop there and there's music and food, and you overlook it. Shoot, now I can't remember the name of that place. But it's a really pretty location. He was born on that bank, and that's where he grew up. And then when the United States decided that they were going to take that land, they wrote a treaty and they moved the Indians here to what is Upper and Lower Sioux, which was one long reservation that went from Big Stone Lake to almost Mankato. And it was 10 miles on the south side of the river, in a big band that went that way. And Morton was where the person that controlled the south portion was, and Granite was where the person that controlled the western portion was. So, yeah, so that's the group that makes up the Dakota. And village at the end, little village at the end, and they're talking about the river, and they talk about them as being fish eaters, so they ate a lot of fish. So, my uncle married a girl from the Yankton Reservation, and so my family always gave her a hard time for being yeah, yep. So this is my group, and this is what it looks like out on the Rosebud. We don't wear those clothes anymore, but I did ride a lot of horse when I was a kid. We are the Tetons, which we are the Western group. We're the dwellers of the plains. We really call ourselves the people. That's what the Lakota means. That's what Dakota means. We are known for our hunting and our warrior culture. That's the stereotype that we are, because we hunted buffalo, and we just had an anniversary the other day. It was June 25th and 26th, so woohoo, go Lakota, yeah. They wear shirts that say CK, not Calvin Klein, but Custer Killers. So it's a big deal. We celebrated, we had a party, Little Bighorn. Battle of Little Bighorn was, and so my mom has had a party since college. So my mom's 80, so that's a lot of parties on that date. So it's something that's big in our family, but that's part of what we're based on. We are the westernmost of the three what are called Siouan languages, and that means that we speak that same language group. Now, I got another picture here. This is a teepee on what would be on the plains, and this is an actual smaller one. This one is made probably only from about 12 buffalo hides. This one is a calendar, and it's what are called winter counts. And so a winter count is they would meet as a group in the wintertime, all the council fires that made up the Lakota. And when they got together, then they would decide what was the biggest event that had happened to them that year, and then that would get recorded. This got taken by the United States and put in the Smithsonian, and then that building burned down, and so this is lost forever. There's only like 4 pictures of this. But it's normally on a hide, and it goes from right to left. The Lakota read from right to left, and they know that they know dates because in 1835 there was a huge meteor storm. People in England and France write about it, and it was so bright that it made the nighttime daytime. And this meteor storm happened and was just an incredible occurrence. And on every winter counts, like you can see, this isn't the right one, but there'll be stars and they'll be moving. And they'll be in all of them, and they all occur at that same time. So then they have a basis where, and we used to have a librarian at the college, Dixie Noyes Howe, and she, and she taught, she worked in the library and taught all the entry-level university experience coursework. But her brother, they're both from the Pine Ridge, her brother, Dr. Howe, that's what his doctorate's on, is studying and breaking down the winter counts. And it's pretty cool. He came and spoke at Southwest a number of years ago. There are 7 bands of the Lakota. We have the Sichangu, which is up there. You'll notice this is written in what is considered our language. So you'll see that there are symbols like that looks like umlauts, that looks like an apostrophe. This N has a tail on it. It makes it, my mom always says it's nasally. So you gotta, so it's like a German guttural sound. It's but we are, the French term for us was brûlé, which meant burnt thigh. And so I'm a member of the tribal group that is called the burnt thighs, or burned thighs. Now, the story or the legend is that there was a council fire. All the councils got together, and when we approached, there had been a prairie fire, and we had got caught in it. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar, but growing up, I think we put out about 15 prairie fires. They happen quite readily in western South Dakota, and they happen and they're fast. And everybody comes out of the houses with blankets, and you're out there and it's hot and it's miserable, but you're trying to stop the fire from getting to town. In Parmalee, where my family moved to, we probably put out 8 or 9 just coming from the north side down onto the town. Down in White River, where we used to live, we didn't get them as often because it was greener, because the river went through, but you'd get them occasionally, and we'd have to all run out with blankets and put them out, because by the time a response team would get there, it's 40 miles away. So prairie fires are pretty common, so that's how we got our name. There is the Ogallala. The Ogallala are a group of people that are on the Pine Ridge right now. They are, the name kind of means wanderer or orphaned. I get different interpretations on that word. They were like, the bull elk wins the battle against the next elk, and so that other elk has to leave the party. And that's kind of what these group of people were. They lost their family and they kind of formed their own family, is how the story goes. But the Ogallala and the Sicangu are very closely related, and they argue with each other like Wisconsinites and Minnesotans. And it's the same battle. I mean, the Ogallala will tell Sicangu jokes, and the Sicangu tell Ogallala jokes. Yeah. So, like my favorite one was the Kawasaki, and it shows a cow with socks on it. Ogallalas ride Kawasaki's, Then there's the Sanzark, the Itaza Pichu. They are, they didn't put, it's not no bows, but the way they did their arrows was different than the way the rest of them did their arrows. So, like where you might have 4 fletchings, or you might have 3, they were not the same. They may have only done 2 fletchings. So it just is a difference in how the Sanzark came about. Hunkpapa, that would be Standing Rock. Sitting Bull is a direct descendant, they're direct descendants of Sitting Bull. So, and right now it's really kind of crazy right now. There was a genealogist that, there's a guy, a LaPointe, that's out in Standing Rock area, and he has said that he is a descendant of Sitting Bull, and everybody's kind of, everybody claims to be. But they took a lock of his hair, and they had a lock of Sitting Bull's hair because they cut his hair when they killed him, which is disrespectful. But and they kept it at the Smithsonian, and so they checked it against it, and he is a direct descendant. And they've returned the hair. So, yeah. So the Hunkpapa, the Ogallala, and the Sicangu, and all these guys, they're all a part. The Minikanju, and then there's the Blackfoot, and then, who am I missing? The 2 Kettles. So this is our group of people. Now, the largest group of people happens to be the Sicangu. We are all over the place. You'll find us on the Pine Ridge, you'll find us on the Rosebud, you'll find us on the Standing Rock, you'll find us on the Cheyenne, you'll find us on Brule and Upper Brule, and then you'll find us on the one just south of Chamberlain. And I just drew a blank on that one. But there's Dakota on that one too. And that's why in the wintertime we have the Dakota 38 come in about December 19th, and they're riding their horses. They come all the way from just north of Chamberlain. So they ride all the way across South Dakota, and then they come into Minnesota, and then they ride up over to Mankato. But this is the group of people that I descend from. In that, my whole life we claimed that, and then in the last few years we've had relatives discover that my grandmother grew up on Little Crow Camp, and so this, this was originally the land that the Lakota were. When South Dakota started to become a state, it was the east side of the river was South Dakota, and the west side was all Lakota territory. This is what was given to us in the 1868 treaty at Laramie. But this was our ancestral grounds. We went all the way to the Platte River, so anybody going on the Oregon Trail would encounter us. This was our our winter grounds. So in the wintertime, we'd be down in this area because it was much warmer. And then our summer grounds went and followed the buffalo, and as the grass got greener, we actually went all the way up into Montana, through Wyoming, and into Montana, and the westernmost portion of where we were would have been the Greasy Grass River, which is, we called it the Greasy Grass, you guys call it the Little Bighorn. So all the way to there, and then we'd come back this way. Now, we ate buffalo almost entirely, but we were able to gather what are called wild turnips. My mother always calls them muskrat food, so wherever you see a muskrat hut, you'll be able to find turnips. So, and then they would be cooked in a stew. But corn, which only grew about that long, would grow at various places the further north you went, and so then corn became a part of the diet. And then as you go further north, then like berries would be here in April and May, and then June, and then you start getting them in July, and then you always had berries. So some of the foods we ate was the course that we traveled on. So, but it's a very big territory. In the beginning, it was all on foot. Somewhere in, I read an article that talked about the conquistador helmet that it had, and it went up and it pointed, that there was a person that traded for one in the late 1600s down towards the Platte River. And so there's a family out in, I can't remember if it's on the Pine Ridge or the, not the Cheyenne, that they actually have this helmet yet. But so that meant the horse came, late mid-1500s. And so when the horse came, that transformed this culture dramatically. This culture went almost all horse, and so we're considered one of the horse tribes of the United States, whereas the Dakota didn't get the horse like we did. Now, crazy thing is the Jesuit priests that were here, Father Hennepin, and shoot, now I'm drawing a blank on the other names, but there's a group of them, and they all were trying to Christianize the Dakota people, but at the same time, they were also trying to write their language. And so they're the first people that actually put the language down on paper with the help of other Dakotas. And in doing so, they got to know the Dakota people really well. And there's a story that there were some over here by where Hennepin actually is on the banks, and they needed to get, a priest had fallen ill at Wahpeton, and they needed to be able to get to him and get a replacement there and then get him back. But by horse, it would take like a week. Well, the Dakota said, well, we'll dog trot him. And in modern terms, it was referred to as an Indian run. So the lead runner would take off, the rest would follow, and then the trail runner would come up from the back and replace. But they didn't actually run it like really super hard. It was a dog trot. So if you see a dog just kind of loping, that's what they did. And they carried their food at the side in a pouch, and it was what we would refer to, the modern name is pemmican, but it would have been ground up jerky mixed with fat and berries. And you can get a version of it today called the Tatanka bar if you're out in South Dakota. But you can order it online too. But it's the food that they ate, and they would take a pinch of it and eat it, and then they would keep going, and then they carried water. But they ran that priest in a day and a half. Yeah. So there's a battle that happened at Wood Lake, and then within a day and a half, they were attacking Wahpeton in 1862. And to this day, it's super surprised Americans in the Army that an army could move that fast. But that's what they did. They dog-trotted there, and then they waged a battle. So it's really interesting when you think about it. There's a lot of cool stuff about the history here and how these people lived. There's all sorts of stories. The train came through here, and it was the Iron Horse. And there's, if you've ever been on I-80 and in western Nebraska, the banks of the Platte River are like 300 feet above, it's really high. And there's stories where they'd be sitting on the ledge watching the trail of people as the trains, the wagon trains would go by, and they would just watch them because intriguing, it's something new. And there's a lot of the issues that occurred down on that Platte River between the Lakota and European culture. So these are present Lakota so Sisseton, Lake Traverse, Standing Rock, Cheyenne River, Crow Creek, there it is, Lower Brule, Pine Ridge, Rosebud, Yankton. So my family, Murdo, is right about here. Then there's about 8 miles south of Murdo. It's a plateau like this, and then all of a sudden it drops. Right where it drops is the Big White River, and at the bottom of the hill, just about a mile from where the road goes down, is a former town known as Westover. And there is a building there that you can still read on the placard that's there, Sterner Welding. So that's the homestead for the Sterners. They came from Fremont, Nebraska, where my great-great-grandfather was an implement dealer. And he took his wife when the land was opened up, and he took his wife. They dug a hole in the side of the river, and that's what she lived in for the first year. She was pregnant, she had 5 kids, and he went back to Fremont because he had a job. And that's where their money came from. And so then her and the oldest kids built the first house and everything in Westover. Well, if you spit really hard, you'll go across the Big White River, and that's the land that they gave to my oldest grandpa. And that's where my name comes from. My name is Mila Yuha, and Mila Yuha means has a knife. And when we were put on the reservation, just like Ingor Jogrobitsen was switched to Johnson at New York at Ellis Island, has a knife got switched to knife. And so the oldest knife is just on this side of the Rosebud. So my mom and dad actually were neighbors for a bit in their life, but never knew each other until after college. So, yeah, crazy, huh?